They thought they had it all figured out. My son-in-law had been wearing that smile for months, the kind of smile that tells you someone knows something you don't. And my daughter, my own daughter, had been standing right beside him, holding his hand like they were a united front against me. They had no idea that the moment she gave me that ultimatum, she had already signed the document that would cost them everything. Let me back up. My name is Harold Sims. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a property management company from nothing. Started with one duplex in Dayton, Ohio that I bought with money I'd saved working double shifts at a manufacturing plant. My wife, Carol, God rest her soul, used to joke that I loved that duplex more than I loved her. She was wrong, of course, but I did love it, because that duplex was proof that a man with no college degree and $200 in a savings account could still build something real. Carol died 6 years ago. Breast cancer, caught too late. After that, the company became everything I had left, along with my 2 kids, my daughter Sylvia and my son Theo. Theo is the good one. I know parents aren't supposed to say that, but if you'd spent the last 2 years watching what I watched, you'd say it too. Theo lives in Columbus with his wife and their little boy. He calls me every Sunday. He never asked me for a single thing he didn't earn. Sylvia is different. Sylvia is smart, charming, beautiful. She got all of Carol's looks and about half of Carol's judgment. She'd always been a little spoiled, if I'm being honest. Carol and I gave her more than we should have. Private college, a car when she turned 17, a down payment on her first apartment. We thought we were being good parents. What we were doing, I understand now, was teaching her that things come without cost. When she was 29, she met a man named Stewart Webb at a networking event. Stewart had a firm handshake, good teeth, and the kind of confidence that fills a room before the person does. He sold commercial insurance. He was good at it, apparently, or good at making you believe he was good at it, which I've come to understand is a different skill entirely. They got married after 14 months of dating. I paid for the wedding. $72,000 at a venue outside Cincinnati. I didn't complain. She was my daughter. She was happy. I danced with her to a Frank Sinatra song and thought, this is what all of it was for. I gave Stewart a position at my company 8 months into their marriage. He'd been complaining about his income. Insurance commissions were down, he said, and Sylvia wanted to buy a house. I thought I was helping. I made him a property acquisitions coordinator. Good salary, benefits, company truck. The first year was fine. Stewart was charming with clients, showed up on time, seemed to learn the business quickly. But somewhere in the second year, something shifted. He started offering opinions in meetings he hadn't been invited to. He started talking about scaling and restructuring and modernizing our portfolio strategy. Words that sounded impressive until you asked him to define them, at which point he'd pivot smoothly to a different set of impressive-sounding words. Then he started wearing my watch. Carol had given me that watch for our 20th anniversary. A Seiko presage, automatic, dark blue dial, simple gold hands. It wasn't expensive by some standards, maybe $800 when she bought it, but she'd saved for it without telling me. She'd cut her own grocery budget for 3 months. When she handed me that little velvet box, she cried. So did I. I wore it every single day until her diagnosis, and then I put it in my bureau drawer because I couldn't bear to look at it and feel all that joy and all that loss at the same time. I don't know how Stewart found it. I'd never shown it to him. I'd never told him what it meant. But one Thursday morning, I walked into our weekly staff meeting, and there it was on his wrist. I didn't say anything in front of everyone. I waited until after the meeting and pulled him aside in the hallway. That watch, I said. He looked down at his wrist like he was surprised to see it there. Oh, this? Found it in the storage room off your office. Figured it was just sitting around. Storage room off my office. Figured it was just sitting around. That room has a door with a lock. I have the only key. That's Carol's watch, I said. Give it back. His expression didn't change much, but Something behind his eyes did. Sure, Harold. Sorry, didn't know it was sentimental. He took it off right there and dropped it into my hand. No apology in his voice. Just a transaction. I should have fired him that day. I didn't. He was my daughter's husband. Theo told me later, when I told him the story, that was the moment I should have seen the whole picture. He was right. About a month after that, Sylvia called me on a Tuesday night and asked if I could come to their house for dinner that Saturday. Just us, she said. Stewart wants to talk to you about something. I arrived at 6 o'clock with a bottle of red wine and a container of the lemon cookies I used to make with Carol because Sylvia had always loved them. She met me at the door and there was something off in her smile. Too wide, too practiced, like she was bracing for something. We ate dinner. Good food, I'll say that. Stewart had grilled salmon, made a salad with those little candied pecans. He was charming, telling stories, asking about my week. I kept waiting for the pivot. It came with dessert. Stewart put down his fork and folded his hands on the table like a man about to give a presentation. Harold, he said, I want to talk to you about the future of Sims Property Management. He had a folder. He actually had a folder. He slid it across the table to me, and inside was a 20-page proposal for restructuring the company's ownership. His plan involved transferring 30% of my shares to himself and 15% to Sylvia, leaving me with 55% majority, but, as he explained it, creating alignment and long-term incentive for the people most invested in its future. I'm already the most invested person in its future, I said. I built it. Of course, he said. He had an answer for everything. He talked about legacy planning, about tax advantages, about what would happen to the company if something happened to me. He talked for 20 minutes. When he finished, Sylvia looked at me with those eyes she's had since she was 4 years old, the ones that could make me agree to almost anything. Daddy, she said, this is the right move for all of us. I told them I'd think about it. I took the folder home and read it again that night. Then I called my attorney, a woman named Catherine Pace, who has handled my business affairs for 11 years. She went through it line by line and called me back the next morning. Harold, she said, some of this language is standard, but there's a clause on page 14 that I want you to look at very carefully. I looked. It was buried in a subsection titled Management Decision Authority, written in the kind of language designed to be skimmed rather than read. What it said, in effect, was that in the event of a governance dispute, a two-person majority among the 3 shareholders could override the primary shareholder on operational decisions. In plain English, if Stewart and Sylvia voted together, they could override me in my own company. Stewart hadn't offered me 55%. He'd offered me a veto that could be vetoed. I did not sign the folder. I told Sylvia the next week that I needed more time to review it with my attorney. She seemed annoyed, but not alarmed. I think she expected me to come around. I think Stewart had told her I would. What I actually did was call Theo. He drove down from Columbus that weekend, and we sat at my kitchen table for 4 hours going through everything. The proposal, the watch incident, the pattern of comments in meetings, the way Stewart had slowly started positioning himself as my operational second-in-command without anyone formally giving him that role. Theo is an accountant. He has a methodical mind, and he doesn't panic. He looked at everything, and then he looked at me and said, Dad, you need to get him out of the company. I knew he was right. But I also knew that firing Stewart meant breaking something with Sylvia that might not be fixable. I was still hoping it wouldn't come to that. The holiday weekend is when it fell apart completely. I hosted the 4th of July cookout the same way I'd been hosting it for 20 years. My backyard, my grill, invited the neighbors, invited Theo and his family, invited Sylvia and Stewart. My grandson Oliver was there. Theo's boy, 6 years old, and already obsessed with whatever creature was living in my garden. It was a good afternoon. Then it wasn't. I was at the grill when Stewart walked up and stood beside me in a way that felt deliberate. He waited until there was no one else within earshot. Then he said casually, like we were discussing the weather, that he and Sylvia had talked to a business attorney of their own, and that if I wasn't willing to move forward with the ownership restructuring, they were prepared to explore other options. What other options? I said. He listed them calmly, contesting my competency to manage the company, filing a complaint with the Ohio Division of Real Estate about alleged licensing irregularities. He didn't specify which ones, because there weren't any, but the implication was clear enough. These things take time and money to resolve, he said. Easier for everyone if we just move forward together. I stood there holding a pair of tongs and looking at this man standing in my backyard eating my food and threatening me. I'll think about it, I said. I went inside. I told Theo I needed to talk to him privately. We went upstairs to my office and I told him everything Stewart had just said. Theo's face went very still. Then he said, "Dad, that's extortion." I called Catherine Pace the next morning. She told me the same thing Theo had. She also told me that the licensing irregularities threat was almost certainly empty. I had a clean record, but that a bad faith complaint could still create headaches. She told me to document everything. She told me to sign anything. And she told me something else that changed the shape of everything. She had a colleague, a forensic accountant, who could review my company's financial records for the past 3 years. I authorized that review the same day. It took 11 days. What it found was not nothing. Stewart had been submitting expense reimbursements for property inspections that had never occurred. Not large amounts, 200 here, 350 there, but consistent, methodical over 18 months. The total came to just over $14,000. He had also used a company card to pay for what appeared to be a personal home renovation project, roughly $9,000 charged across multiple invoices, split to keep them under the reporting threshold. $23,000 more or less. I sat in Catherine's office and looked at the summary document for a long time without saying anything. "Harold," she said gently, "this is a criminal matter." 2 weeks later, I had Sylvia over to my house alone, without Stewart. I made coffee. I sat across from her at the kitchen table where she'd done her homework as a child, where I'd helped her study for her SATs, where Carol had sat across from her the morning she left for college. "I need to show you something," I said. I put the forensic accountant's report on the table between us. She read it, or she started to read it. About halfway through, she pushed it back toward me and said, "This is wrong. Stewart wouldn't do this. Sylvia, you've never liked him." Her voice was getting louder. "You've always looked for reasons to control everything. This is why I married him, Dad, because unlike you, he actually respects me as a partner." I didn't respond to that. I asked her to read the rest of the report. She wouldn't. She stood up, gathered her bag, and at the door, she turned around and looked at me with an expression I hope to God I never see on my child's face again. "Apologize to my husband," she said. "Tell him you're sorry for this witch hunt and that it's over, or I promise you, you will not be a part of my life." I sat there for a moment. I looked at my daughter in the doorway of the house where she grew up. I thought about Carol. I thought about that watch, that little blue dial, the way Carol had cried when she gave it to me. I stood up. I looked Sylvia in the eye. "I love you," I said, "but I won't." She left. The house was very quiet after that. I filed the police report the next morning. I did not contact Stewart in advance. I did not warn Sylvia. Catherine filed a civil suit the same day, wrongful misappropriation of company funds, breach of fiduciary duty. The HR documentation was clean, the evidence was documented, and within 10 days, the Dayton Police Department had opened a formal theft investigation. I terminated Stewart's employment by certified letter. It took 3 days. 3 days of silence from Sylvia. Then she called at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, crying so hard I could barely understand her. Stewart had been served. He was, she said, talking to a criminal defense attorney. She hadn't known. She was saying it over and over. She hadn't known. She hadn't known. I know, I said, and I did believe her. I told her I loved her. I told her I was still her father and that would not change. But I also told her that I couldn't make this easier than it was. That Stewart had made choices, and those choices had consequences, and the kindest thing I could do for both of them now was let the process be honest. She cried for a long time. I stayed on the phone. Stewart pled to a reduced charge 8 months later, 1 count of misappropriation, restitution of the full $23,000, 3 years probation, no prison time, which I know frustrated some people. Catherine had told me that prosecuting the case fully would take 2 years and significant legal expense, and that a plea allowed me to recover the money and move on. I made that call. I'd make it again. He and Sylvia divorced 14 months after everything came to light. She told me later it wasn't just the theft. It was everything that the investigation had uncovered about who he was. The way he'd talked about me behind my back. The things he'd said about Theo. The fact that he'd once told a colleague that he expected to be running my company within 5 years. The night Sylvia told me about the divorce, she came over and we sat on the back porch, and she didn't say much at first. Eventually she said, "I owe you an apology." "You don't," I said. "I do." She was quiet for a moment. "I thought he was the strong one. I thought he was the strong one. I thought you were just, I don't know, getting old, losing your grip on things. I let him convince me of that." I reached over and took her hand. "You're your mother's daughter," I said. "She trusted people too. It's not the worst thing to be." She laughed a little, the way you laugh when you're also trying not to cry. I opened the drawer of the side table we keep on the porch, and I took out the Seiko. I'd had the band replaced and the case cleaned. It looked almost new. I turned it over in my hand. On the back, Carol had paid to have 3 words engraved, still keeping time. "I want you to hold on to this," I said. Sylvia looked at it. "Dad, no, that's Mom's." "Which means it's ours," I said. "Someday you'll give it to someone who deserves it. You'll know when." She held it for a long time before she put it in her pocket. Theo brought Oliver down the following weekend. We spent Saturday afternoon doing exactly nothing. Throwing a ball in the backyard, watching Oliver dig up half my garden looking for whatever he was certain was living in there. At one point, he came running up to me, dirty to the elbows, and asked if we could make cookies. We made lemon cookies, Carol's recipe, the one she'd written on an index card in her looping handwriting, still tucked in the old tin box on the second shelf. Oliver stood on a step stool and poured in the sugar and managed to get flour on literally everything within a 4-foot radius of himself, and I didn't care about any of it. When they were cool on the rack, he looked up at me and said, "Grandpa, are these the best cookies in the world?" I looked at him for a moment. "Yeah," I said. "I think they are." That night, after Theo and Oliver had driven back to Columbus, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the quiet that comes at the end of a long thing. The company is doing well. Better, honestly, than it was doing when Stewart was in it. Overhead is down, the books are clean, and I promoted a woman named Sandra from our property management team who has forgotten more about this business than Stewart ever knew. I thought about what Theo had said to me months earlier at this same table. He'd said, "Dad, I hope you know it wasn't about the money. It never was." I hadn't fully understood what he meant at the time. I thought he was talking about Stewart and Sylvia. But sitting there that night, I realized he meant me. He meant that what I'd fought to protect wasn't the company, wasn't the equity, wasn't the reimbursements or the card charges or the legal documents. It was the right to have built something real and to have it mean what it meant. Carol's watch is with Sylvia now. She sends me a photo of it sometimes, just sitting on her nightstand or on the kitchen counter. She doesn't say anything when she sends it. She doesn't have to. I still make the lemon cookies. I probably always will. I've thought a lot about what I'd tell a younger version of myself if I could sit him down at that kitchen table. Not the version of me that was building the company, not the one working double shifts at the plant. The version of me standing in that hallway holding Carol's watch in my hand after Stewart had dropped it there like it was nothing. I'd tell him, that moment right there is the one that matters. Not what you say, not what you do, just whether you see it clearly for what it is. Because I didn't. Not all the way. Not then. I told myself I was being patient, being fair, giving my daughter's husband a chance. But if I'm honest, what I was doing was avoiding a pain I didn't want to feel. The pain of admitting that someone I'd welcomed into my family had never seen me as anything other than a resource. That takes a long time to accept when you've spent your whole life trying to be the kind of man people can count on. What Stewart taught me. And I don't say this with any bitterness, because bitterness is just grief that forgot where it was going. What he taught me is that there's a difference between trust and willful blindness. Trust is something you extend based on evidence and withdraw when the evidence changes. Willful blindness is what happens when you care more about keeping the peace than seeing the truth. I confused the two for too long, and it cost me. The thing about consequences is they don't wait for you to be ready. $14,000 in fraudulent reimbursements, $9,000 on a company card. Stewart had made those choices methodically, over 18 months, and every day that I didn't look closely enough was a day those choices compounded. That's not bad luck. That's how it works. What you allow, you eventually have to reckon with. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. Sylvia came back. Not because I forced her, not because I made it easy. She came back because somewhere underneath the manipulation and the misplaced loyalty, she still had her mother's capacity for honesty. She just needed to find it herself. And she couldn't have done that if I'd softened the consequences to protect her feelings. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is stand completely still while everything falls apart and trust that the person you raised will find their footing. Theo knew. He always knew. He drove down from Columbus and sat at my table and told me the truth when I was still hoping I was wrong. That's what integrity looks like in real life. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. It's just a person who tells you what they see even when you don't want to hear it. I think about Oliver throwing a ball in the backyard, covered in garden dirt, asking if we could make lemon cookies. That's the real measure of a life. Not the company, not the equity, not the documents Catherine filed. Whether there's someone small who trusts you enough to drag you away from everything serious to do something completely useless and completely necessary. Carol knew that. She always did. I'm still learning.